Okay.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in. Today is the last day of November, and it's a great day to, be happy with work and everything. So, my name is Ransom Nima. If you're coming across my channel for the first time, I'm a medical student in my third year. I'm studying radiography at Federal University of Technology Basic Medicine here in Nigeria, Imo State. And apart from my medical studies, I'm also a professional medical writer. So today, I have an amazing guest. Hey, Jackie, could you introduce yourself for the audience?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here today, Ransom. I'm so excited. I'm Jackie Scully. I'm a teacher, and I have a podcast called The Teacher Story where I talk with teachers all over the world and like to share their stories. And I just recently self-published a book called The Guided Teacher, which is my journey through childhood, being a student, all my teaching journeys, and then ideas for the future of education. And my passion is to really think about education as a place of joy, community, human flourishing, and not just like stress and taking tests and getting all these assignments done, but a place that kids really enjoy being in school.
Amazing. So, could you tell us more about your book? Just give us a hint before we go deeper.
Yeah. So I wanted to write my story because I felt that I interviewed all these teachers for the last couple of years, and I wanted to have people learn a little bit about who am I? Why did I even become a teacher? What has that journey been like? Also for people not in education, because I've had some friends already read my story and they're not teachers and they've learned a lot about education and it's opened up their eyes. So I start with my chapter one about my childhood and talked about like my vision of like wanting to be in community, exploration, play, and kind of using that as a springboard to go back to of like how I see schools. And then I talk about some of the hardships I went through as a student in school. School was not very kind to me. It was a hard place to be. I put a lot of pressure on myself. I felt like I wasn't as strong in certain subjects. I felt like I was very competitive. I got bullied a lot. I mean, I'm sure a lot of students can relate to that. So when people read the story, I think there's areas where people are like, oh, that happened to me too. I've gone through that as well. And then I write about why I became a teacher, how I taught in different places like Hawaii and China, and then various states in the United States. I've taught in public school, charter, and private school, and those different experiences. And then I get into the pandemic and teaching during the pandemic, which was very, very difficult for everyone around the world. But I think a lot of teachers and students could relate to that part because it was very difficult to be in school. A lot of us were on Zoom, on virtual, and were isolated, and it felt scary and not connected in community. And then I kind of end with my spiritual journey that I've been on for the last 2 years and really tapping into my purpose and my service to the world and how I went to not just be a teacher in this classroom, but also talk about what we can do to make it the best possible for our kids. Because, a lot of students struggle with mental health, teachers struggle with mental health, just people in general. People just aren't doing okay. And I think they need school to be a place of community and feeling like they're valued, and feeling that they have a voice and that they're important and that it's not just about competition and getting straight A's or becoming a scientist, a doctor, a business person, a teacher. Those are all great things to want to do, but that you have a talent no matter what. And you have something that you can provide and give to the world. So I end on that inspirational note. And then I leave the reader with a curriculum at the end, which is my ideas about how we can have children really think about the whole person, your whole identity, and not just like taking classes in different subjects and that's it. So it's kind of my journey through all of my experience up to now. I'm 41 years old, so I had some things to write about.
Amazing. That's a really amazing summarization you just did there. Thank you so much
Thank you.
for, explaining that for us, and So there are too many writers that will come across this video, right? That wants to be someday be an author like me, So what advice would you give, to someone who wants to be a writer like you, a podcaster, a speaker, and also an educator like you? What advice do you have to tell them?
I would say first, you have to believe it. Like, it's so hard for us to believe that we can do something that seems so far reached, like, and we see other people, but it's also bringing people in to your community that are already doing it. So one thing is, I didn't know I was going to be a podcaster. So I listened to podcasts. I started talking to people who create them, and I started picking their brain and saying, like, well, how do you even do this? How do you even get started? And you just start doing one little thing at a time, but it's about your connections and community. And there's a ton of wonderful people on LinkedIn that will help you. I'm one of them. If you're interested in starting a podcast or a book, reach out to me and I will give you all of my steps and advice on what to do. I also worked with a book coach for my book. His name's Brian Monahan. He's on LinkedIn. And it was great because he set a schedule. He gave me tips. He helped me with the self-publishing because I wanted to self-publish. I thought that would be a better route to go. And I did it in pieces and it felt more manageable. So don't think you have to do it all on your own. If you really want something and you desire it, and it doesn't have to be perfect, just find those people in your network and reach out and ask questions, jump on a Zoom call, get some advice. And then maybe it's someone you do work with one-on-one who, they have a service that you might have to pay for, or maybe it's someone who'll just give you some advice and some help with the ideas that you have. But it's really manageable, but it's connecting with people that are already doing it.
Networking, exactly. Networking is the key, to opening doors to you. If you want to be a podcaster, if you want to be a writer, if
Yeah.
you want to be a speaker, if you want to be an educator, and that's really amazing. That's the memorization of everything. Thank
Yeah,
you so much for answering that. So, are you ready for the third question?
sure.
All right. So, how do you research, right? How do you research and prepare your content? So tell us, are there any resources or techniques, you think would be very helpful to the audience?
Yeah. So as far as like my podcast goes, it is teacher focused, but it could be anyone in education. And I've actually had people on from even kind of outside of education, but they're interested in bringing their ideas. Like maybe they're an entrepreneur and they have ideas about building schools. So I will either have someone approach me now that I've been doing it for a couple of years, but when I was like early on starting, I would go on like LinkedIn and other spaces in education and look for people who seem to have interesting stories or interesting things that they're doing in education. And I would just email them and say, hey, I have this podcast. I'd love to showcase the work you're doing, maybe the school, whatever that is of interest. Here's some questions that I ask. And it's really just networking and building those relationships. It depends on what your focus is. So if your focus of the podcast is more about a specific topic, then you want to go out and do some research, maybe connect with experts in the field. But having like experts in the field on like a podcast, if you're writing a book that requires some research where you want to talk about certain topics. So like mine's my story, but I have a vision to have another book about actually like looking at different models of education and not just like the traditional model. So now that I've talked to some people on my podcast, I can use them as resources and have research about like, okay, how do you design a virtual school? How do you design a school where it is a micro school where it's different families that are running it? And so again, it's just kind of going out and meeting a bunch of people and networking and asking questions. And when you first email someone or DM them on LinkedIn, show interest, look at their profile, pick out things that you think are appealing and interesting. And then when you message them, write those specifics about, ooh, this was really interesting. This is something I'm working on. I'm wondering if you'd want to, jump on a virtual call and get to know what I'm doing. I'd like to get to know what you're doing and show the genuine interest. And when people see that, not everyone is going to respond, but when people show that you're genuinely interested in them and you've done research about looking at their profile, maybe they have a website you checked out, most of the time they're going to want to respond to you and help you out.
Absolutely, absolutely, definitely, definitely. Don't be afraid to send that message,
Yeah,
right? Don't be afraid. Just do it.
just do it.
Nobody can tell what happened. Yeah, nobody can tell, what will happen or what that relationship will take you from where you are to another level. Nobody knows,
Yeah.
right?
There's this great
So
saying I got from a friend that is a great connection of mine. She's been on my podcast that she says, anything for you will not miss you. And it's a great empowering statement because it's like, if someone doesn't get back to you, it's not meant to be. The right person will get back to you. And then that's a good collaboration.
sure, definitely, definitely. Try to like build a solid relationship, because relationship does do a lot of things, like networking too. They're kind of like synonymous to each other.
Mhm.
And yeah, so thank you so much for answering that question. So, Jackie, I have a question for you. Are you ready?
Sure.
So, I see you're a writer, and there are some challenges you face or you faced, you conquered and you're still conquering currently. So tell us, what obstacles, have you encountered in your journey as a writer, as a podcaster, as a speaker, as a teacher in school, and how did you, cope and how did you conquer such challenges you faced?
I'll start with my teacher journey because that was before any of this else was created. So I was teaching in Hawaii and I decided to move back to Pennsylvania, where I'm from. And it was during the Great Recession. So 2008, we had the Great Recession. The economy was terrible, ended up becoming, a global recession. And they were cutting a lot of teaching jobs. I didn't have my job cut, but our pay was cut. And it was very, very hard to survive. So I had to move back home. I was almost 30, I had to move back with my parents. And I was like, I couldn't find a job. So I almost gave up on trying to find a teaching job. I worked in retail. I did what I had to. I was a substitute teacher. I just had perseverance. I believed that I was meant to be in a teaching role and I would find it eventually. So, what I decided to do is I had a hard time finding a job in some of the public schools because they're so big. There's so many people trying to apply. And I thought, I don't know anything about private school, but maybe I'll just try it out because I really still want to be in the classroom. So I changed my mindset and I started to look for private school jobs which were a lot smaller. It was easier to apply to. You just could send your resume and a cover letter to a school instead of public schools. You had to do this whole big, long application
Yeah.
online. They had hundreds and hundreds of applicants. And as soon as I did that, I got a job. So sometimes you just have to do a little tweak and go a different route. So that's one piece of advice for an obstacle that I found in at least the teaching job search. With podcasting, it's a lot of experimentation. You have to be okay with failing. You have to be okay with it might sound a little not so great. It might not look so great right away. But if you believe in your message and you believe in like the actual content, you can reform it. You can get better at it, work with people who are in the field to help you with like audio editing and making like a great like podcast cover. And so when I first started, it was very, very amateur. It didn't sound that great. It didn't look that great, but the content was there. I had real conversations with people that had real stories and people enjoyed it. So even if it wasn't like so professional, and it still isn't that professional today, um, the content is what matters. And then you can refine everything else. And I don't get stuck on numbers. I don't get stuck on numbers like how many downloads, how many subscribers. I'm not chasing that. If it grows organically, awesome. If it doesn't and I have a lull, that's okay. And I can keep trying other things. But my whole thing is go back to, is the content good? Is it authentic? Is it real? Are there people who are interested? And I always try each season to add a layer. So it's not the exact same, it is the same storyline in my episode, but every season there's an additional layer. So first season was like just bare bones. Teachers wanted to share about the pandemic, just to like get out their voice. Second season, I brought back some former students who are now teachers and seeing like how they have been impacted by their teachers. This third season that I finished up is all about innovation. What's the new thing in education? What are new schools going to look like in the future? And then the next season I'll start in January is kind of like that, but then bringing some people on that have been on in the previous one. So it's always like a layering. So it keeps an interest, kind of like if you think of like sequels. Um, and then with the book, oh man, so many challenges with the beginning, getting started, the motivation,
Yeah,
and then the end of getting it all wrapped, the editing and getting it published is the hardest and like the most patient part of it. The meat of writing it, if you get in the zone, is easy for the most part if you have the time, but it's getting
yeah,
started. So that's why I think a book coach can help and give you some inspiration. What helped me was, because I'm a teacher and I'm very organized and outline focused, I just wrote down like an outline of ideas I had for each chapter. And I didn't just go and start writing. So I had a
yeah.
scaffolding outline, and that kind of helped me keep focus. And then for me, I like to listen to music. And since I was writing a story about my life, I listened to music about each kind of stage of my life that inspired me to bring back memories of that time period. And then I would sit in that memory, listening to the music. And then it would bring up this whole story of a piece of that time period. And then I could write about it. And then another piece of advice someone gave me is just start writing. Don't even worry about what it looks like. Don't worry about grammar. Don't worry about it sounding all poetic. There's some areas of my book that are like pretty straightforward, and there's some that are very cerebral and thought provoking. It's not all the same. um just write and get it on there. It could be like word vomit on a paper, it doesn't matter. It's coming from you and it's coming from an authentic place. So that's what I keep going back to, is be authentic, be yourself. Don't try to be someone else. Always go back to, am I being who I am and my passion?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That was so engaging, Jackie. So engaging. So engaging. I
Thank
believe
you.
that um yeah, I believe that the audience will really grab something from this. Thank you so much for answering these four questions correctly. And I have some couple of questions for you to, answer, and we wrap the session up. So could you share do you have any memorable, moment that you can share, or an experience about the topic of your book?
Mm,
What gave you that, what gave you that inspiration to say, hey, this is the topic of this book, you
okay.
know, and your podcast, and and your, the way you carry, how will I put it right now, is what experience did you get, or like an inspiration you got from, that topic you gave your book? So could you tell us that, please?
I'll start with the podcast because that came before the book, and then I'll go into the book. So
Okay,
I was in a lot of spaces online where teachers were very upset with the system.
sure.
They're very sad and frustrated about what happened during the pandemic. They felt burnout. A lot of teachers, particularly in America, were quitting. And I felt there needed to be a space to sit down and have them share their story, to get it off their chest, to just have the space for them to say, hey, I have something to talk about. So that was my idea. That was it. It was just going to be a project with maybe just like a few people. And then it just kept
Yeah,
going, because people like when you want to give them a space where they can be heard. When people feel heard, they feel valued, they feel important, it empowers them to do something with their life, um, to stand up for what they believe in. So it helped me heal too, because I was going through a lot through teaching in the pandemic. So it was for me as much as for my guests. And like now I have relationships with them, and I have learned so much more than they probably have taken away from even the space I created for them in the podcast. And then the book came to me because it was also part of my spiritual journey where I got closer to my relationship with like God and my inner self. And I felt like I needed to tell this story of the things that I've gone through in my whole life in teaching to kind of cleanse and kind of feel like healed myself from it and maybe help others heal, not just to heal other teachers, but maybe people resonate with parts of my story that have to do with when they were a student or when they went through a hardship in college or if they went through a hardship in a relationship, because there's personal pieces too. And there was one part of my story when I taught in Hawaii where I had a disconnect between me and the students I was teaching because they were very different than me. Like I'm this, white lady from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and they're all from Pacific Islands. And I'm here trying to teach them. And they're like, you don't even know who we are. We don't even know who you are. And there was this like disconnect. And I write about it in a very specific way because I had this like almost diary entry of this particular student who challenged me, but in a good way, to make me see that I had to get to know them. I had to get to know my students on a cultural level, on a community level, because you can't teach anyone. No one's going to listen to you if you don't care about them. That was like my biggest takeaway. And I learned that I was very lucky at 25 years old. But I wrote that specifically because I think we are missing that in a lot of places, not just in like American schools. I think in a lot of schools is we have to get to know our kids. They want you to see them. And so I think my theme in both the podcast and the book is being seen and being heard. And people feel valued when you do that. And so I hope that resonates with people and maybe inspires them to look at their life in a different way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow, that was so captivating, Jackie. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Thank you so much. So is there um any last word you want to tell the audience? What are the last word you want to tell them, before we round up this session?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for giving me this space to share my story and the work I'm doing. I think podcasts, video content, blog content, writing a book, any kind of media content is so powerful. And it's real people, everyday people who are making a difference. And it always reminds me of this quote that I have up on my bulletin board right here. It says, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has, by Margaret Mead, who was an anthropologist. It's so true because we look up to, well, when's the government going to change and help us? When are the leaders of the world going to change and help us? And look at the world we're in. They're not really doing that much, right? It takes everyday people like you and me, like anyone creating content. It's not just to create content so we have subscribers or that, maybe some people make money off of it. It's actually to make a change and inspire people because every
So
single person can do it.
absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much, Jackie. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching, this session. Do well to, if you like the content, do well to like, share, subscribe. There's love in sharing. Who knows, you can touch life, through this video by sharing it.
I love that.
So thank you so much for our invitation, Jackie. Thank you
Thank
so much. And
you.
God bless you. God bless you. God bless you.
God bless you too. This is wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome.